Thank you for that nice introduction. Well, my name is Heather Sielicki. It's been 2 years since the Hours Camp stopped in my neighborhood. The encounter changed my life because it really opened my eyes to the staggering numbers of people struggling with housing insecurity, poverty, and homelessness in Eugene, Springfield, and really the lack of resources that we have to respond. The Hours Camp was a group of housed and unhoused activists, and they were protesting the criminalization of homelessness, or not being able to have a legal place to sleep. In fact, the acronym HOURS stood for Occupy the Universal Right to Sleep. And they were advocating for the camping ban to be amended to allow people the opportunity to use a tent to self-shelter when no other option was available. I didn't know that was going on when I met the Hours Campers. I was a stay-at-home mom, a PTO chair, neighborhood association president. I was really in my kind of own bubble. I knew there were some serious challenges in the community, but it wasn't until they came to my neighborhood that that I really started delving into the issues. I didn't understand that there were literally thousands of people who didn't have a safe shelter, and that there were only a few hundred shelter beds available. I knew about Egan, I'd heard about it, but I wasn't a volunteer yet. And I didn't realize that when I saw people out in the streets, that it was just really the tip of the iceberg of how many people were really in need. I'd found out that the Hours Camp was coming to my neighborhood actually through an email. A neighborhood chair in a different area, he sent me an email with the subject line, "Tag, you're it." The legal and illegal camps in the River Road area had gotten to the point where it was consuming a lot of his board's energy in terms of people communicating with their elected leaders, appointed leaders. Law enforcement had gotten involved with the effort to have the camp moved, an effort described in city council meetings as a game of whack-a-mole. And in this case, the so-called mole popped out on a grassy patch of land a few blocks from my house on 34th and Hilliard. A friend I hadn't seen in a while tagged me on Facebook. She knew some of the activists that were involved in the Hours protests and told them I was a good person. It was her mentioning this that reminded me that I had a choice in how I was going to respond to the situation. The typical neighborhood association knee-jerk response would be to have the campers move along and work with law enforcement, even if in reality there was no place for the campers to move along to. But that wasn't really my first reaction. As my neighborhood association president, I felt it was my responsibility to be welcoming and neighborly. I wanted to be a good person, so I kept an open mind. When I went out and talked to the campers, I was totally welcomed. They shared their stories openly. They were even apologetic to me for any inconvenience that their stay there might cause. They'd had a bad experience the night before where someone had tipped over their porta potty. And they also had good experiences in the neighborhood too, with some nice random acts of kindness. I noticed they had a donation table set up and it was overflowing with zucchini. It was August. But what I really noticed most of all was the way that those people interacted with each other. I mean, it was a mix of housed and unhoused people, but the way they respected each other, and I guess what I really understood at that moment is how important that safety in numbers is, and those relationships for people who are on the streets and are completely vulnerable. And it really struck me. And it's important to note, prohibited camping is actually not a crime on undeveloped parkland. Violators cannot be arrested for that offense alone. But the Hours campers, they'd been through the routine before, and they knew that what usually happened, a complaint would get generated, and then the property gets closed to the public, stick up a sign that says no trespassing, put up a sign to the people there and say, 24 hours, we're closing this down, and if you're still here, you're going to get arrested. So, unfortunately, the camp only closed down after about 3 days. Complaints were lodged with law enforcement and with our ward counselor, who was also a complainer, and largely for aesthetic reasons, because it looked messy. That took precedence over people not having anywhere to sleep or eat or pee, you know, the aesthetics of it looking messy. It was really what kind of changed my mindset that day to more of a YIMBY mindset. And I really threw myself into learning everything I could about the complex and multi-threaded, tangled web of poverty and homelessness. And my education has been extremely humbling. To find out what was happening and who was taking care of people, I had to get uncomfortable. I had to talk to people who my parents had told me never to talk to, church people. I was raised by rigorously ex-Catholic parents. And they had definitely warned me. I'd been taught to really respect that line between church and state and stay on that state side, to stay away from the church. And in my neighborhood association work, I guess I'd done the same because it was comfortable. But now that I cared about this issue and I found that who's really taking care of it? Oh, the communities of faith. I needed to go and be neighborly with my neighborhood churches. And it was my good fortune that my neighborhood church is the Episcopal Church of the Resurrection. Oh. So, you know, Pastor Brent, he was amazing. He handled my cluelessness and my questions with a great deal of care. He shared the work they were doing. At the time, they had Conestoga huts. Now they have tiny houses in their parking lot. They were dreaming about Square One at the time. They were still working on Opportunity Village, and they were doing interfaith and Egan. How do you do this with 100 people in your church? I don't know. It's tremendous. And what really stuck with me, what he said is, there's just so much need. It doesn't even matter what you do. Everything is helpful. I thought, oh, that's such a pass. I can really just do anything and be of service. And it felt pretty empowering. And I think how many of you have heard Pastor Brent talk, right? I mean, everyone walks away with a call to action, and I felt a call to action for sure. I really kind of joined, observed, created everything I could. I joined the Human Rights Commission Homelessness Working Group, and that's a really awesome organization that's truly trying to work on the issue of people being jailed or fined for just basic living. I started attending the Lane County Poverty and Homelessness Board meetings, which is a great place to go to find out what they're doing in the city, county, and at the major nonprofits. And I also got involved in the tiny house movement, seeing how all that works. A very empowering and creative way that people are learning to even build their own houses to take care of their needs. And just so much to learn. I even went on Google and I started receiving news alerts anytime the word homeless and shelter and success came up. So for 2 years, I've been getting that news feed. Sadly, I mean, the number of results have just gone exponentially. It's not just Eugene who's suffering from a major housing crisis. It's all of the United States. We particularly have it bad, but it's quite big. So in the course of my education, I really learned that there's just 3 things that we need to be able to provide shelter. Someone to manage it, someone to fund it, and someplace to put it. Those are really hard. Now, at the time, I was a stay-at-home mom, so I knew I couldn't manage it. And I was a stay-at-home mom, and the wages for a stay-at-home mom haven't really changed in the past 50 years. They're still the same. So I knew I couldn't tackle it from that angle. But I was a neighborhood chair, and I could help with the siding, because I'd heard a lot of stories in my meetings about neighborhoods who came together to fight organizations who had found the money and the ability to manage a program, but then they still couldn't cite it. And I thought, oh, that just can't be. How can we get rid of this sort of negative opposition that often arises? And what can we do to shift our neighbors and how they think about temporary shelters. If we included them in the planning process, might they be more supportive? So at the time, I was working with a multi-neighborhood group on a planning process. This is my neighborhood, Southeast Neighbors. We live, if you know where Market of Choice is, on 29th and Hilliard, we're kind of the south side from there. And what I did is I put together a multi-neighborhood group because neighborhood associations believe that you get work done through committees. Doesn't always work, but it's a belief practice. So we started a vulnerable populations work group. It was a committee, and we invited the people in these neighborhoods to come. And we first were like, well, what can we really do together? Well, we can take a look at this region and look for sites where we can have people stay. So we started working with the city. They gave us a spreadsheet of all the public property. I can't believe how much public property there is out there. Some of it just sits vacant. And we started meeting once a month to share our progress. We communicated early and often when we did find things. So what were we looking for? Well, there's a lot of different ways. Well, not really. There's just a few different ways where people can legally have safe shelter. And I'm going to just quickly go through them. One is they could stay in a tent in somebody's backyard. That is a legal option as long as you provide toilet access. And it could be compost toilet. It doesn't have to be an indoor situation. That's one way. We had a member of our working group who had a bunch of extra bedrooms that were unused, and they converted them into little apartments. So that's another way if you have extra space. You could even have, if you have a business or a location, you can have people stay in tents on your business location site, up to 6 actually. Tents are cheap compared to other options. They're also pretty cold. You can go a little bigger and get a Conestoga hut. Those ones that you've seen, it's about $1,000 worth of materials and about that much in labor.
Outside, if you haven't seen them.
Yeah, I can see them outside. They have them here. So we thought, well, where can we go and find somebody who might take these, as many as 6 even. And we looked in different places. We even looked in like cul-de-sacs that there weren't any houses around. You know, who owns it? We were able to use a database to look at property to see who owns it and who we could talk to. Now, we were lucky because within the first month, there was a church for sale on Willamette Street. And when we found that, one of our members is like, this could be a great place for shelter. And you know, we've been out there looking outdoors, but here's this beautiful building, and it was for sale. And it was actually about to be sold. But we brought in the City of Eugene community development staff. We brought in St. Vincent de Paul, and we were all looking at that site together, and we all thought, this is a great site. Terry McDonald had the idea, how about a shelter for homeless high school students? And we were all like, yeah, definitely, let's do this. And it was such a great feeling. The truth is, the neighbors who brought that property to my attention were maybe the most NIMBY neighbors I knew, but they found that location. And they were so proud and so excited. I've never seen them so involved. It was a really cool thing. And we just talked about it with positivity. It was never we didn't even think about the NIMBYs that would come out. We all felt so good about it. And because we've been meeting as this vulnerable population work group with the 4 associations, instead of having a big neighborhood meeting about it, which often brings out a lot of contentiousness, we just kept meeting in our vulnerable population working group, which was already framing the issue in a different way. These are our vulnerable neighbors in our community. So the people who come to the vulnerable populations meetings, they tend to be in the same mindset. I mean, if you're angry about it, you're not going to sit in a 2-hour meeting and listen to people who are excited and trying to find shelter. So when Terry McDonald came to do the official neighborhood meeting, he came to our vulnerable populations working group, and he said, "Why aren't you people mad at me? I've never had this happen before." And it worked out great. It was right when we found it. There was already a buyer on the hook, and because of all the interaction I'd had with the faith community, we were meeting in this group trying to develop a tents for 10 people. How many of you were part of Tents for 10? Anybody here? No. Yeah. So, and I told them, "Hey, look, we found this great site." And sure enough, there was a pastor in our meeting who knew the pastor who was selling that church, and he was able to contact him and tell him, "Hey, that this could be a shelter. This is really within our mission." So we used that network of people who were there to all work together. Everybody worked together to try to get that site done. And St. Vincent's applied for the home funds to buy it. They got it. Chris Pryor said, "This is the project received the highest marks in the evaluation process of any home application he could recall." And a big part of it was because, you know, we had a site that people supported. And the people supported it partially because they found it. We had another success with the location. I told you about the location at 34th and Hilliard, the grassy spot where the Hours Camp was. Well, that site's still stuck in my mind because it's a good place. It's just a grassy spot. Well, it turned out that the city of Eugene actually owned the parking lot adjacent to it. And they were also next door to Good Samaritan, which is a wonderful facility. They do a lot of assisted living and nursing care. But their mission is to help the least and the lost. And Steve Chaddock there, the administrator, he was a member of our neighborhood board, and we've always worked closely with them. In fact, they're our neighborhood care center if there was an earthquake. We have a disaster plan, and they're part of it. So when we found out that the city of Eugene owned that spot, Steve and I were very happy, and we moved forward to try to obtain it for a rest stop. The Nightingale Health Sanctuary was situated near the mission at the time, and politically they'd been asked to kind of move along because there are already a lot of rest stops in that general area. So they moved them to our location on 34th and Hilliard. Now, it doesn't take neighborhood approval to situate a 6-person car camp. And the word car camp is so frustrating because it doesn't have to be a car. It could actually be a little tiny house or a Conestoga hut. It could be a trailer. But to have a 6-person site, we don't need neighbors' approval or city council approval. So they just put it there. And we weren't sure what was going to happen. At the same time, my own experience working in the neighborhood board, I was done. It's time to go. I was there 5 years, and I had taken a job at Whitebird. I was ready to move on. So we had a whole new board that would have to approve if the site was to get bigger. And so this is where we are with that site on 34th and Hilliard. Nightingale Health Sanctuary would like to be a full capacity rest stop. Instead of the six car camps, they'd like to have full 20 units. That's a big parking lot. They could definitely fit it. I mean, it could be a rest stop. But in order to move from car camp to rest stop, it has to go through city council approval. And they're often highly swayed by the neighborhood board of the location where the site is. So right now we're in a critical phase. On September 19th, the Southeast Neighbors Board at 6 p.m., they're going to be meeting at Good Samaritan to decide whether or not to recommend that the site be expanded to be a car camp. A rest stop of 20 people. So we'll see how that goes. the last project we really came up with, I wanted to share with you is Tomorrowland. So some of the people on the Vulnerable Populations Working Group had some experience with tiny houses, and with the neighborhoods, we decided to apply for a matching grant. Every year, the city of Eugene provides about $50,000 of neighborhood matching grants for communities who want to improve the quality of life in their neighborhood. So we figured out what it would cost to build a tiny house, and 3 of the neighborhood associations applied for neighborhood matching grants, and our hope was to find a site that would host 3 tiny houses, each paid for by this grant for different associations. It didn't work out. We weren't able to find a site because it's hard to find a site to do, because it's a big commitment. But what's nice about that is we have the template. So if any of the churches want to do a tiny house program, we have the matching grant form ready to go, and we have all the costs. So the effort certainly did not go to waste. But I think what I've really learned as I've been going through this is it's really the relationships and not necessarily the programs that people need most. Our Vulnerable Population Working Group has been, I think, successful because part of the people who come, they're already involved in helping out in some way or another, but maybe there's not a place to get support themselves. So it's a place to come and talk about the efforts that people are doing. Having these meetings, as far as getting people to come to a public meeting, I have people who never would attend public meetings, but they came because they said, well, finally, you guys are talking about something I'm interested in. And then I've had people come who really didn't understand the issue at all. They just wanted to learn. But it's just a more cozy atmosphere to learn about it from neighbors in a circle, you know, and it's been really nice. And what I really find too is neighborhood associations, they do care, but the community education about homelessness has not been very strong. When people find out what the crisis is and the solutions like rest stops and car camping that have been around for a long time that are working, they tend to change their mind. Betty Grant, who was here earlier, she's gone now, right? She was just at a meeting yesterday. She's formed a group called the Northeast Advocacy Collective, and it's pretty much like our group in South Eugene, only in Northeast Eugene. And just yesterday, she went to the Santa Clara board and talked to them about something that the county commissioners are considering. Right now, we have the whole UGB, but in this area, it's complicated because some parts are county land, some parts are city land. So the ordinances around car camping have not been clear. And we want churches who are within the city limits, but maybe are considered county members, to have the same legal rights to host campers on their site, whether it's a church or business or whomever. So she went to the meeting to talk to the board and ask them to endorse the commissioner's plan to increase the amount of car camping and rest stop sites. And she was very pleased to see everyone was in support. And part of that is because she's been to those meetings before. We've been talking to that board. I'm also the chair of the Neighborhood Leadership Council. We meet once a month, about 15 neighborhood associations. And last year we decided that homelessness would be a priority issue for us, and how we would, in our meetings and talking about it. And we've kind of opened the door to talk about it. When I first started with neighborhood associations, homelessness was almost a taboo topic, but now it's changed. And people are ready to engage. I mean, just like the Pope said, it's too late for sustainability. It's too late for us to continue going about things the way that we always have. For me, I've really learned a lot by crossing from this whole church versus state thing. wow, we need church and state to combine on this one. We're never gonna do this without some bold action and forming these relationships with each other. We need quick responses. I mean, look at what just happened this past week, right? With the smoke, people can't even breathe, and all of our neighbors who live outside, no, they're just breathing that air. At Whitebird, we got some masks and went out and started mass distributing them. We contacted emergency management and nobody had any. Nobody was doing anything. We just don't have a system in place. And I thought, that's too bad, because here we are, we have cahoots with vans. We probably could have come up with a system where we distributed masks to churches to distribute, but we just don't have some of those systems in place. So what we really need is to go beyond the charity model and into a real system change where organizations are communicating when there are crises and having some very strategic ways of going about taking care of people. The road to get to YIMBY in our community isn't always easy or comfortable, but I encourage you to get on that road if you aren't there already. Part of the advantage of coming about this from a YIMBY mindset, I found, is when you're advocating for shelter, you can see here, these little dots represent all of the car camping locations. So, and this is about a year old, this map. There's quite a few more. There's lots of car camps out there. People don't even understand that they're out there because they're quiet. A lot of them are tucked away, and then these symbols here, they represent where the Conestoga huts are, and then these are where the rest stops are, and hopefully we'll be getting one over here.
So could you tell us the color codes on those?
Color codes? Sure.
So the orange is cars.
Yeah. So the orange circle is car camping, the square is Conestoga huts, and then this is the triangle is rest stops. So it would be nice to have a good distribution. There are people who think, oh, let's concentrate all the services in one place. But that's not good for everybody. Some people really need to get out of that downtown core and have some chance to be in a different community. It really bothers me personally that we keep our rest stops by the train track. And I've heard people say, well, you don't want to put them in neighborhoods. What, people don't want to live in neighborhoods? No, of course, yes, in neighborhoods. That's where people can thrive and be part of the community, because we know it's those relationships and not the programs that really help to bring people to the next level in achieving wellness and being safe. So the city of Eugene, if you look on your table here, I'm going to just hold this up. Together, we helped to create this outreach handbook with them. And what this basically gives you all of the information you need to know about the legal ordinances that are in place for the car camping and rest stop program, but also some community meeting templates and agendas. If it wasn't for the Church of the Resurrection and even Unity of the Valley, who I also met with and were great partners, I wouldn't have had any kind of real leadership. Because I think when some people look at the numbers, oh my gosh, 2,000 people homeless and 1,000 unsheltered, it can be overwhelming. So if you look to the faith leaders, they're coming up with solutions. Those solutions can be given to the neighborhoods. This kind of outreach handbook could be used in a number of ways. So one example would be if you have a church meeting, you can use this book to talk about these things. But if you're a part of a church, you could also have your community there help support you in your own neighborhood. Maybe one of the things I was surprised when I started meeting people at different churches is that they don't always go to the church closest to their house. I don't know why, I just figured that everybody did. No, it's just like a restaurant. So, so you have different communities, you have different neighborhoods. You have the neighborhood where your church is located, and you have maybe a neighborhood where you live. And those are opportunities for looking for sites. I also wanted to kind of give you a call to action today. So the Santa Clara board, they supported the idea of expanding car camping and rest stops into their area. If you know anybody who lives over here, you can help by contacting them and saying, hey, this is being considered in your neighborhood. Can you reach out to your neighborhood association or counselor and let them know about it? I'm asking you to cross that line between church and state, come over to the state side and get some work done on this issue, because we're going to go far on this.
What is the name of that board?
It's the Santa Clara board, and there's these pamphlets on your table that shows the neighborhood association maps, so you can take one of these home with you.
Thank you.
The other neighborhood, if you know anybody that lives here in the southeast neighbors area, this is if you could contact them and say, hey, we understand you're going to be voting on a rest stop in your neighborhood, and here's why you should support it. So you can really help with some advocacy on those two issues right now.
What is the day and the time for the board?
The day of the Southeast Neighbors Board meeting is September 19th at 6 p.m. It's at Good Samaritan at 3500 Hilliard Street. The Santa Clara, they've already met, but on Monday, the River Road Community Organization is meeting, and they'll also be talking about this, and that'll be at 7 p.m.
Where?
I have to look it up, but I'll look it up. Where is it?
I think it's at the River Road Annex.
River Road Annex. I'll check after this meeting. I've got it on my phone. So those would be really helpful areas. And then we invite you to attend an educational forum on Wednesday, October 25th. So St. Matthew's Episcopal Church on River Road, they can't take any more people living on their site right now, but they wanted to put together a forum and a conference so that all the churches could come together and really look at what the options are and figure out how to work together on this. And that's going to be at the Episcopal Church from 6:30 to 8:30 in the evening. And
What was the date on that one?
that one is Wednesday, October 25th from 6:30 to 8:30 at St. Matthew's, which is on 4110 River Road. And it's very tentatively titled Homelessness in Santa Clara. And what they're hoping to do is have as many churches as possible attend the forum and then try to take action to try to help prevent more deaths on the street this winter. So 2 more things before I start taking questions. How many of you have campers or someone at your church right now? So quite a few. And how many of you would like to, but you don't have it yet? So there's still a few there too. Well, remember that you could work together with other members of the community to try to find places that will work. I guess that's all I have for the moment. Let me just start by taking some questions now.
Define for me the difference between a car camp and a rest stop. I'm not sure.
So when I use the terms car camp and rest stop, those are actually from the legal ordinances. That's why we call them that. The car camp is where 6 people are allowed to stay on a specific property, up to 6. Could be anywhere from 1 to 6. Rest stops, it's a bit different. You need an agency to manage it, and they can take up to 20 different
But they would be
people.
camping the same way in cars and
It really depends on the site. Like the site we're trying to get over here in South Eugene, they're proposing it as an all Conestoga hut. residents. So there would be 20 of those. In some communities, like Nightingale used to do all tents. So either is possible. It just really depends on how much money the nonprofit has, whether they could afford the nicer shelters, really.
Thank you so much for your program. I know now that one of the big fears that we have for the homeless and for putting people into better housing, the RV camps, so many of them are being bought up and sold and then emptied. And we're very fearful of this happening. I know St. Benny's is in the process of buying up, and we've just obtained our sixth RV camp up towards Portland. And because people have been living them 30, 40, 50 years, some of them, and when it's sold, it has to be emptied. And this is true what's happening in Glenwood now. All car camps that are sold have to be emptied. And it's part of their process for gentrification or something. And so this puts a lot of people in the street. So we're going to have to really find housing and start like last year, finding housing for these people. A lot of us very afraid of this happening.
Yeah, she's exactly right. And some of the problems we're having too is there used to be a low-income housing tax credit that was available, and that really helped nonprofit developers to be able to invest in affordable housing. And we've just lost a lot of our federal funds. I'm on the Community Development Block Grant Advisory Board, and we didn't even know how much money we were going to have until recently. And all the money we have, really, we're at a point where we have to make decisions like, is it Yapoa Terrace, that one building? So because it's an older program for affordable housing, if that building were to disappear, the program would disappear because it's kind of grandfathered getting to keep doing it. So the building needs to be fixed. It's got a lot of issues. So I'll get you next. What we have to do is take that money and put it towards that building because we're going to lose the program if we don't. So we have to make decisions that are very, very tough. There's just not enough money to go around. So that's why it's so important that we try to protect those affordable housing stocks like mobile home parks and ensure that people who are going to be displaced have somewhere to go.
John.
I really like the idea that I guess there's a total of 70 of those car camps around. I didn't realize there was that many. So that potentially covers about 400 people out of the, 1,500 to 3,000 people that are homeless, or maybe more. My concern is that these car camps and camping ideas, they don't really address the issue of, they assume that people are without means to support themselves. That's an implicit assumption when you make these car camp proposals. My proposal is that we take into account the fact that 60% of the people who are homeless are only that way for a few months, and then they find an apartment and then get off the street. And then also, when you're homeless for 2 weeks or more, that puts you at risk for becoming chronically homeless, according to 15th Night, or whatever organization it is, that talks about youth homelessness. So my idea is to try to prevent homelessness in the first place. It's sort of like the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I guess the HUD organization in town has a budget of $30 million a year to administer all the Section 8 that happens in Lane County. And I'm thinking if we had a ballot measure on the Lane County ballot for equivalent in monetary cost to the jail levy of about $100 per parcel per year, that would raise about $18 million. You could put that into the HUD organization and have rental assistance for various people that need it, either short-term or long-term. And basically, also, I'm thinking that the free market shouldn't be left out either. That there's, I'm not sure how prevalent it is, whether there's too many people that can't afford any rent at all versus how many people can just not qualify for the typical rental application where you have to make 3 times the rent in order to qualify for an apartment. I'm not sure what the ratio is between those two groups, but I'm assuming that the number of people that don't qualify based on 3 times the rent is pretty big. So we want to do a tenants union where part of the campaign would be to campaign for lowering that income requirement, among other requirements that would be required to get an apartment.
Thank you. And other programs that have been successful, like in my own organization, I work for Whitebird, and we have a PATH grant, and we're allowed to use that money to help for people who are about to experience an eviction. Just yesterday, one of our case managers wrote a check for $300 and saved a family from who knows how much money they would have lost if they'd have gotten evicted and ended up on the street. So having a PATH, yeah, it's a PATH grant from HUD, but a lot of these HUD grants are, there's a lot of uncertainty, as we all know. Yeah.
How can we get a copy of this handbook?
So these handbooks are available through Reagan Watchus at the city manager's office. Her last name is spelled Watjus. And you can call her at 541-682-5010 and tell her that you want one for your congregation, and she'll get one for you. They're doing it only by request.
Thank you.
Mike?
So question for you is, what city councilors are supportive of expanding the rest stops? And people might be surprised that city councilor in Southeast may not be supportive of Betty Taylor. So you can tell folks that. Also too, Heather's an example how a one-person networking in our community can make such a huge difference. So Heather, thank you for your work. So the more it can work, getting involved really can make a difference. And this is the best example I know of right here. So, and also too, if you have questions, CALC is also part of the car camping, the rest stop program. If you have any questions about that, you can also call me at CALC at any time, and I can provide information for you as well.
And the phone numbers are in here.
I'd like to hear about the function of something. Are car camps and rest stops dusk to dawn, and the villages are all-day dwelling?
I think that's a good way to look at it, sort of. So there's actually another program that I didn't even mention called Dusk to Dawn. It's its own separate program. It's managed by St. Vincent's during the winter months. It's 2 army mash tents filled with cots that they put people in, and people wait in line for hours for these locations. So that's the Dusk to Dawn program. Car camps, there is no rule as to when people can be there or not. It's really dependent on the property owner. Like some churches, they expect their congregation to start arriving at 9, so they ask their car camper to be out by 9. Just really depends. Some have the tiny houses, so they're there all the time. In the rest stops, it's typically people are gone from 9 until 4 p.m. and that's so that they're out of the area and looking for jobs or do whatever they need to do. So it's kind of what the typical rule is. Todd.
I'm a retired man, and I'm 65, and I don't need a whole lot that I own. It's almost 7,000 square feet, and I don't need 133 feet of land. And it occurred to me that if it were legal for me to subdivide my land into smaller properties that could be sold or rented to people who want to build tiny houses, then if that kind of change was made in our land use, it could make a huge difference. And I see a lot of evidence, particularly younger people who are very energetic and capable of building tiny houses. There's a tiny house movement that all they really need is land and to be allowed to do the simplest thing of connecting to the electricity and to the water and sewer, which I have found very easy. But anyway, if you just take 7,000 square feet and divide it into 6 parcels, you get 6 pieces of land, 30 feet by 40 feet. And that's way bigger than you need for a tiny house. So do the math. That's actually a kind of a comfortable little cottage site. And that's 6 people who have housing, and the cost of their land would be $15,000. So why don't we just liberalize some of these restrictions on land use?
Yeah, I think land use is definitely coming up more and more as one of the barriers that keep housing from being accessible to people. And there are some ways to address it, and that's typically what neighborhood associations are good at, because they usually have people involved that understand land use pretty solidly. But there are things that you could do, like let's say your church was in a neighborhood where there were a lot of people who wanted tiny house communities. You could work with planning staff to create what's called an overlay zone over a particular area and have different rules, like pilot different programs like what Todd's talking about. But that's not the kind of thing you can really do alone. This is another one of those things that takes an entire community. One of the things that's really working for the site for Good, everybody, 34th and Hilliard, is because of Good Samaritan. Having that business owner, and not just him, but also I went over and talked to this guy's building this 5-story luxury apartment complex behind Albertson's, just kind of kitty corner from where we want the rest stop. He's totally in support. So I was able to get Steve and Mike from the apartment complex to meet with me and John Reese and Pat Farr on that site. We said, look at this site. Tell me this isn't great. We got the next door business owner, loves it. The guy down the street building a new place, loves it. We all want this. And that means so much when they hear people right there from the neighborhood saying that they want something.
I just wanted to ask, I can yell about it. The meeting on October 25th out at St. Matthew's, is that only about Santa Clara, or would it be helpful for those of us who are with a church that has not committed to get some more information?
I think all churches should come to that, especially the churches that haven't committed, because it's a real great place where you'll be able to learn about the challenges that churches really face, and they'll have some great guest speakers. So I would say, even if you don't live in Santa Clara, definitely go.
So I understand that communities would be very pleased to find places for the young, juvenile people, and I've lived in River Road area where we've had break-ins, and then the grass was cut so that it wasn't like the tents weren't right behind our houses. And we really, because of the criminal element in our neighborhood and the drug element and this, the major bicycles, like they're recycling, and then there was the human waste, and I don't know if that's going to be cleaned up. So I've been reporting when they're there because I want to be enjoying my neighborhood and not smell feces. So I don't even go into the woods anymore because of that. So there are problems, and I have been nice to them at times, and other times not, because of my property value and my fear of being harmed, though that doesn't usually occur. But some of them have made a nuisance with noise level. So there's all, I don't know if these home developments that are on the churches, do they screen their people so they get the best, the creme de the homeless?
Yes, and I think that your concerns are totally valid. I mean, it's horrible to go outside and there's needles and feces. I totally, we see it all the time at Whitebird. Every morning when I go to work, there's needles, right? So it's hard. But I want to make the careful distinction between legal camps and illegal camps. So we're trying to situate legal camps. Legal camps have sanitation on site. So there's porta potties, adequate porta potties, so that you don't have people having to go into the bushes. There's dumpsters, so there's places to just take care of garbage and garbage pickup. And there's a case manager who's keeping an eye on things. So it really makes a difference. When you have the kind of people you're talking about. It's different than the programs that I'm talking about, in the sense that there really is no program for the illegal campers. People are just on their own trying to find a spot, for whatever reason. When you have the car camping program and the rest stop program, everybody's screened very carefully, and a case manager is involved as well. So you don't have some of those kind of problems that impact the neighborhoods. In fact, a lot of people have commented how their neighborhood's been safer by having legal camps, because those legal campers watch out for people. And they're, a lot of people, we're looking out for the vulnerable. I mean, there are criminal elements out there for sure. Let's protect those vulnerable people from the criminals. And that's what I think a lot of the rest stops and car camps are trying to do. Ann?
Well, just one comment. I heard Pete Kern speak and talk about the crime rate in an area going down when legal camps were set up. The crime rate actually went down if there were legal camps available. So just another piece of...
Yeah, there was a site on Moon Mountain in the Laurel Hill Valley Citizens area, and they were having constant problems. And they just put a car camper there, and it went away just by having that constant presence. It kind of acted like a security guard. The guy I was talking about that's building the apartments, he works with Essex Construction. Essex Construction typically will put a car camper on their construction sites because it makes it more safe for them, because people aren't out there stealing. So I mean, it's how it's being used. It's a benefit. Michael.
Ask the question: should folks be contacting their city councilors now to support the rest stop at 35th and Hilliard, or should they wait till after the neighborhood association makes its decision?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure I have an answer. I mean, definitely, I think if you know people that live in this area, contact them and encourage them to contact the neighborhood board. Right now, that's probably what will influence them the most, because what I'm finding is some of the concerns that they have are, they feel like they have to protect the neighborhood. But if they understand, no, the neighborhood wants this, we want to be more involved in helping people, then they're more open to supporting it and endorsing it.
I was interested in what this fellow was talking about, his land that he wanted to divide up. And I was interested, actually, thinking along the lines of housing for myself, that I can invest, that I can invest a reasonable amount into. I have a little bit of assets, but the housing prices around property and housing prices just keep shooting up, and I didn't get in at the time. And so I was looking for, even thinking along the lines of park model homes, maybe investing about $30,000 into 500 square foot, something like that. I would like to. So what he was talking about.
Yeah, with the tiny homes, I think it's a pretty amazing thing. People started realizing that they could build their own homes and have. Recently, they changed the law so you could have a loft, so that you can have a kind of a separate space for sleeping, which makes the whole tiny home concept even more appealing, because it elevates that area so there's more space. And what I would suggest with that is to get in touch with are you wanting to be more involved in learning? So there's a group called Tiny House, Tiny Villages that meets twice a month. And after...
David Wade?
What is it?
David Wade is one.
Wade, yeah, David Wade. Yeah, David Wade. And if after this talk, I can give you the contact information. But they're just amazing. They've been really pioneering the whole tiny house movement in Eugene and getting things going.
They meet tonight at McNeil McNary House over here, I think.
The McNeil Riley House over near. Is it 13? Yeah, right near here. Yeah, across from the fairgrounds. They're meeting tonight at 7 o'clock. Yeah, so you could meet them, and there's usually a pretty good turnout at their meetings. And they're looking at also establishing tiny house villages to help people live more in community, which I think a lot of us want to do now. Square one is tiny houses. And there's two different kinds of tiny houses. With Square one, they're actually plumbed and permanent, versus there's also tiny houses that are on wheels, and they are not typically plumbed, but both are two types that are allowed.
I guess the plumbed ones, the costs really.
The plumbed ones do go up because there's something called system development charges from the city, so that if you put something in, it's the cost of hooking up to all the systems and the roads and the water, and it can be thousands of dollars. It can be the same cost as the house. But one of the things that Alyssa Hansen, she's a planner at the city, she's been working with them to try to put in a place maybe where we can waive those fees. I don't know how they're going to make that happen. Could be done through hardship. They've talked about waiving the fees for people who want to build tiny houses in their backyard and making those available. I think that sounds great, but my fear is that people who can afford to build them are going to just Airbnb them, and then they're not going to help our housing shortage at all. So I'm hoping we'll figure out a prevention for that. Yeah.
Portland had a thing where they were asking people to build tiny houses in their backyard, and then they had to let people use them that were housing, needed housing. And then after 5 years, they could turn it into an Airbnb.
That's right.
So that increased housing.
Yeah, I love those ideas because it increases our housing stock. I mean, that's really what we need across the board, is more places for people to live. But I'd really like to see a lot more low income and very low income housing.
Michael?
A couple of questions. When I went to the work group that's trying to advise the city manager on how to recruit a new police chief, and found myself bringing up the past police chief in Madison, Wisconsin, who was female, and who also had engaged her staff in compassion training, even taking them to a Buddhist institute that was out in Wisconsin. And I haven't really heard you mention the dichotomy between these projects that you're talking about that the city is doing for like car camping, like the rest spots, which I consider to be sort of very poor advantages for a malfunctioning system. And at the same time, we have the police pretty aggressively hauling people in for very minor offenses that are not, that they still can't handle. I talked to somebody who was who's on some kind of disability, so he gets about $700 a month, and spent, was charged $144 going to for camping in Washington Jefferson Park, and he went through the new municipal court system that is supposed to deal with these problems of the poor, but in fact, it's sort of, from my impression, just like the car camping program, it's a mask for the city to refuse to deal with. So I'm wondering if you think we could be more influential on what kind of police chief we get. In particular, the city manager described a really expensive and extensive international headhunter recruiter who was at the meeting and talked about all these things they were going to do to try to get the best candidate. And they're going to advertise this community all over the United States and further for potential new applicants to be on to be the police chief. And I think that oddly enough, one of the things that would happen is if we had, I'm wondering if you think if we should put some direct pressure on the city manager and this search system to deal with potential female candidates for police chief who are interested in compassion and who would advertise that. My feeling after that meeting, I thought about it for a while, would be if dealing with homelessness was a high priority for our expectation of the new police chief, and if having a woman as a candidate was a high priority, that what would happen is those thousands of people who may be recruited would see what the values are in this community and what we might expect from a qualified police chief candidate.
Yeah, I think he's got a really good idea there. We can't talk about homelessness without talking about law enforcement, because that's how Eugene's been handling homelessness, by taking people and moving them along, and like he said, imposing fines on people who can least afford to pay them. So yes, that's another area where we can cross over to the state side and say, hey, we want to get involved with the police chief search. We want someone who is who's gonna explore alternatives to criminalizing, and attend those meetings, send those emails when they're asking for feedback. I say that with anything with the city, when they're asking for feedback, if you could hook in a way to talk about how we need more services for people who are homeless, just do it, because that's how people know that it's a priority.
I would say put it in our newsletter. Each of us in a neighborhood organization go and make sure they are inputting and talk to our councilman, and each of us in a church. Yeah, they've already heard from some of us, so they'll hear again. And it's called community organization, which I did as a young person. I can't do it as well now, but you know, they're there. We input to it, and if we were on the homeless side, we would expect compassion and caring and not being rousted in the middle of the night, not being given a fine. But we don't have enough legal aid and all of those options for everybody, and we shouldn't even be wasting the time of the municipal court with these kinds.
And there are activists who also look towards the legal system as a way to address this. Right now, there's a case where someone was arrested, and it's going to go to court. In some states, it's gone to court, and the defendant says, "How could you find me? I had nowhere I could go. There were no shelters open." And then the federal court says, "Well, yeah, you're right. This person is right. They shouldn't have been fined, and we're going to give you a huge penalty for that." And that's how a lot of these really great services have developed in other cities. Like San Diego has this great storage system where people can go and store their things, because storage is a huge problem. But that was paid for courtesy of a lawsuit, really. So if you can't get your elected officials to act through compassionate advocacy, well, if you have the money for an attorney, that's always a good choice too. Yeah.
Heather, can I put in a plug for the Catholic Worker House?
Please do.
I'm Debbie Wright, and I'm involved with the Catholic Worker House. It's called the Paparola House, and it's on 8th and Jefferson, and we kind of went through a few houses over the years because of zoning and housing people, but right now, Brother Charles is able to get almost up to, I think he's got 17 homeless people that he's got off the streets, and some of them do transition out of the car camps and in, because he's got a waiting list. But what he did is he found a big empty house that was going to be condemned, got a hold of the owner, between volunteers and so getting it back up to, you know, code. He was able to, you know, it's kind of an old funky house, but he was able to get it coded. He gets people off the streets, and then in the wintertime, you know, the floor is pretty well, we can't walk because he's bringing people in to get off out of the cold. And he really wants to see, I mean, it's hard to manage and you gotta have the right people in, but he wants to get more houses because there's so many big houses that, you know, you just gotta find the zoning where they'll say, yeah, we'll let 17 people sleep in this house. But he's got bunks in the rooms, and it's a transition to go from car camp tenting to being actually physically housed. You're in a room with maybe like the guys, like 2 bunk beds. But then you've got internet, you've got phone, and so it's a stepping stone, because a lot of people they get $795. They're not gonna be able to rent. So they're able to give him a certain portion and then wait for whatever transitional housing, you know, whatever list they're on, VA, whatever. So it's really a great place, and I've seen some miracles happen of men and women just coming out in front of the bridge and just, you know, being able to suddenly someday having a closet, put their clothes in and shower, and next thing you know, they've got a job in an apartment. So, but, you know, just to see people, the stepping stone from the car camping and the Conestogas to housing and moving out. So that's kind of the goal, is to assist in that, is from car camping and the rest areas, is to move up a little bit more into more housing to transition out, and there's more houses, but it's just finding the houses and the owners and the zoning where they're gonna be able to. We were lucky enough to get this house where, you know, we can have 20 people sleeping there, because a lot of people. So anyways, it's a really good program, and we're just hoping that we've got our sights on a couple more houses.
What's the name of the house again?
It's the Poverello House for the Catholic workers.
Yeah, thank you. The Poverello House, that's just a great program. I wish we had hundreds of them in the community, because it provides housing, but it also provides support and community. And those are really important steps. There was somebody who anybody who hasn't asked a question yet?
I think that part of the problem is that they get a bad reputation, partially because our mentally ill are supported, and the mentally ill are like out on the street, and then that gives the majority a bad name, because we've dealt with some of them who made a real nuisance, or they've gotten to be mentally ill by their drug use, and they are the people that are a problem. Some of them are self-medicating with drugs because they have a mental illness.
Oh yeah. And we're having an event next Wednesday at White Bird at 341 East 12th Avenue, where we're going to be doing outreach to help people see what kind of supports for mental health, medical, dental. We do case management Wednesday from 10 to 2. So if you wanted to come out and see what's available, so that when you're working with people at your church, you can give them all the resources. Please come and check us out. Michael.
I was thinking that you might end up talking about the kinds of communities that the car camping sites present, and also the safe spots, because it seems I have 2 serious questions about both of them, and that is, well, they're both programs that are controlled by either a very large charity organization or the city directly, and yet the people who live in them have very little opportunity or chances to exercise community behavior, which would be, seems to me, would be fostered by if they had an opportunity to vet the people who are going to be living there. I would ask people in this room, how would they feel if they were happily set in a car camp because they desperately needed a spot and were able to make it function, and there were 4 other slots available at that car camp, and then they were filled by people who didn't talk to them, and they ended up with some people who were really unpleasant to be around, that made you feel unsafe, or made your kids feel unsafe, and that is, I think, an issue with the safe spots, and it's an issue with the car camping program. And then I also want you to comment just about the idea that some kind of democratic procedure, like I know of both of those places, both of those kinds of places where people are told that you have to hit the road. And the rest of the community isn't even consulted.
Well, I think that's something we could probably talk about after, because I see we're really running right now at time. So I need to wrap things up. I will be here after if you have any questions. Thank you all for being here and caring about this subject. Together we can make a difference.